this, this line was the redistribution line. This line was the regulation line. And when you go back to this being that simple plane, plus, plus, minus, minus. Laissez-faire, what was laissez-faire believing in? Go ahead. Go ahead, Rob.
Hands off.
Hands off. By whom?
Government.
Government. The government needed to stay out of the business of redistributing people's money or regulating business. And what was the example that we gave in class?
United States.
The United States has been the historic example of laissez-faire. Laissez-faire basically being to allow one to do, to let one do. So the idea is that the United States government is going to stay out of different business regulations. They're going to stay out of redistribution. They're going to stay out of all these things. What was the article that I gave y'all in reference to this? Go ahead.
Mandated vacations.
Mandated vacations. How much vacation does the United States government mandate companies to have?
0.
0. And if you go around the world, what do some other countries offer?
1 month.
A month.
Yeah, there were a number of them that offered a month. There were a number of them offered, I believe, close to 5 weeks, like France did.
Norway.
China. Go ahead.
Norway got like 6, I think.
Let me look on that one.
Norway got the most, right?
No, Norway was the most productive.
Now there's a different question that comes up there. There's a different question. France, Spain, they were all right in that range of about 25 to 30 days. And it says here the minimum required for France and Spain, 25 days or 5 weeks. But oftentimes the average that people took was 6 weeks, and we didn't necessarily get into this. The U.S. required 0. Japan, 10. China, 15. Britain, Italy, 20. Bottom line is that even places that we would consider harsh required paid vacations. But the United States does not require this. Now, having said this, what was the productivity chart? The average amount of goods and services that a worker produces in an hour. Who was number 1?
Norway.
Norway was number 1. Where was the U.S.?
4th.
4th. And what was the number?
47.
47.
43, was it? Bless you. It was 47.42 an hour. I'm sorry. So basically what you have here, and what was the argument that they were making in the article as far as why you should mandate paid vacation?
Paid vacations allow the workers to kind of relax and come back to work, I guess, recharged and able to work more efficiently.
That's exactly what it was. The thought was that if you're able to take paid vacations periodically, then what you're going to be able to do, number 1, is you're going to be able to get away from it all. And then number 2, when you come back, that's going to raise your productivity more and more and more. So it kind of bears out in here, but not necessarily, because the U.S. is still really high. But bottom line, you're not redistributing, or more importantly, this is an example of the government not regulating business. And if it doesn't regulate business, then indeed what you see is we don't all get guaranteed vacations. Go ahead, Orlando.
You said it was $47.42 an hour?
$47.42 an hour is the production or the average amount of goods and services produced by an American worker. Norway was about 60. Norway was 62, 66, and they were number 1. And it mentions in here that number 2, France is up there at 54, Ireland at 48, so the U.S. is actually 4th. I give you these because there's points to be made on all of them. As you look at this, on the other hand, you've got the socialists. What were the socialists?
USSR? That's
The communists.
Go ahead.
Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union. You could even use Cuba to a certain extent today.
Yeah.
And what do the socialists believe?
Controlling the beverage.
redistribute everything.
Regulate and redistribute everything. And what was the example that I gave y'all in class of the difference between laissez-faire and socialism?
They start off like at the, they start off at different starting points, but they all finish at the same place.
Okay, so if you had the starting line here, and you had the finish line here, and I was going to plot at first the laissez-faire or the United States, how would I draw the starting line?
Everybody would get at the starting line.
Okay, the idea is in the United States that everybody, or in a laissez-faire system, would start in the same place. They would be able to get the same amount of public education, for example, that kind of a thing, and then they would take the tools that they get and then apply them. And then how would they finish?
Differently.
They would finish in all sorts of different places, meaning they could go as far as their ability would take them, or as far as they would choose their ability to take them. Now, if you were to go to a socialist state, on the other hand, how would that differ?
The starting line would be all over the place, but the finish line would be exactly the same.
Okay, the idea is in a socialist country that the starting line is going to be all sorts of different places, but no matter where it is that you end up starting, everybody's going to have the same at the end. And what was the benefit of having the same? Go ahead.
Reduced crime and no need for government, because if everybody had the same, then you wouldn't feel like you had to go take it from other people.
Yeah.
No.
The thought is that when wages and money amounts get too dispersed, so if you've got too many people that have an awful lot and too many people that have an awful little, and there's no real middle class, that's generally when the chaos begins to come about in society. But if everybody is more concentrated in the middle where they have the same, then crime would go away. Because you've already got what you would be trying to steal from your neighbor. And if you stole it, you wouldn't have any place to sell it because they've already got it too. And if you didn't have crime and people weren't struggling to make ends meet all the time, you would not really need government. People would just be living, that kind of a thing. But what ended up happening in these socialist countries? What was lost? Go ahead.
Productivity.
Productivity. Even more basic than productivity, there was something else that was lost.
Ambition.
Ambition, initiative, drive, those kinds of things. Because no matter how hard you worked,
You still ended up in the same place.
you still ended up in the same place. So ultimately what ended up happening was that the finish line began to move closer and closer to the starting line. The Soviet Union ultimately ended up collapsing. Go ahead.
So are you saying that doctors get paid like as much
Yes.
as garbage workers or whatever?
In something, a situation like that, yes. And not only that, but the garbage workers and the doctors would get the same health care too. So the thought is that everybody would have access. So if it was provided, if it was paid for by the government, or if you paid taxes and whatnot, bottom line is that you're going to have the same access to schools, to health care, to the postal services, all sorts of different things. In fact, you would probably be walking around with a very, very minimal amount of money because you wouldn't need it because so much stuff is just already there and it's already paid for. Go ahead.
Well, it was already doomed from the beginning, wasn't it? Because they had the leaders who were already kind of ahead of everybody else.
The other thing that you'll see with this is that when you look at a government in an old communist system, the thought is that the government is this little wee piece up here at the top. And basically what they wanted to do is they wanted to turn the society upside down so that instead of the wee piece of the government being at the top, it was going to be the citizens that were on top of the government. But when you talk about initiative and being flawed, why would the government want to go from the top to being down on the bottom?
Exactly.
It really wouldn't. You don't give power. Power's got to be taken away. So what you'll end up seeing is not only was it flawed in terms of initiative here or motivation, but it was flawed here because the government just strengthened itself progressively as it went forward, regulated more and more. So you've got these two that are basic opposites. Welfare state.